everyone. We're going to read Barista Bump Off. Settle down, Aunt Maxie stepped in front of the entrance of the Beehive coffee shop. I'll go see what's going on, she assured me. I'm fine, I told her after we'd run to the front window of my coffee house to see what the shrill screams were about. I'm a couple of months out of surgery, I reminded her. Over the Christmas holiday, I had been a little nauseous. I had put it in the back of my head, believing it to be a side effect of stress. Let's face it, who didn't have some sort of stress? Stress affected everybody differently, and I was no stranger to feeling sick to my stomach when I was extremely stressed. You wait right here, Aunt Maxie ran her hand over my black curly hair before she pushed it behind my shoulder. Your pretty blue eyes still aren't sparkling like they normally do, so I know that you're not 100%. It was my appendix, not my heart, I sighed and tried to get out the words before she opened the door, passing a couple of high school kids on the way in. Good afternoon, I greeted them and turned my attention back to the customers. Let me know what I can get you. They nodded and made their way over to the table where Birdie Beebe had reserved her weekly tutoring session for her fellow classmates and herself. Birdie Beebe was Loretta Beebe's granddaughter. She'd been living with Loretta for about a year now and finally found Honey Springs, Kentucky to be her home. And I loved her. She had really not only become part of my family, but also was a very valued employee to me. She was one of those kids who could see what needed to be done before she was even asked to do it. There were times when I didn't see something and she picked up on it before I did. Though she worked for me every afternoon after school, I started to take the afternoon shift when she asked if she could host her weekly tutoring session here. Of course, I agreed to it because I wanted her to succeed in school, but also because it gave me a chance to see the customers who did come in later in the day when I wasn't there. Do y'all need anything? I asked the group of students and their teacher, Hope Mallory. Is your oven set to 400? Hope asked. I'm not sure, but you can go back and check. I'd gotten an extra insurance for Birdie's tutoring session here at the coffee house because it was actually her home economics class. In fact, it wasn't really tutoring. It was just what Birdie had called it. The time a handful of students and Hope spent together was actually Hope giving them the opportunity to learn what they would learn next year in their class. The students weren't graduating this year, and the class itself was going away. The home economics department was the first to be cut for the next year's curriculum. These students loved it so much, and Hope had agreed to cram as much as she could in during the spring semester if they could find a place. And naturally, Birdie knew I had several industrial ovens in the kitchen and a large workspace to go with it, and she asked me. After I looked into what the insurance would be, just in case someone got hurt, I decided that it was in the budget to host the group once a week and sometimes on Sunday now that spring had arrived. Thanks, Roxy, Hope smiled through the unspoken broken heart that she had over the school board's decision to cut the department. She followed me back to the counter where she disappeared through the swinging doors. Do you see anything you like? I asked a customer who was pacing back and forth between the two display counters. One had donuts in it while the other had cookies and pie. I'm so torn between the red pepper donut and the fireside cookie, her brows knitted. The bell over the door dinged and Aunt Maxie bolted through. Her eyes caught mine as she ran her hand through her short pink hair before she ran it through her face. It's a dilemma I hear all the time. I plucked a plastic piece of parchment paper from the box with one hand and grabbed a to-go bag with the other, a talent I'd learned to do over the years, flicking the bag open. Why don't we buy one, get one free deal? I told the customer. Really? The customer smiled. I nodded and pressed a smile on my face. That's great. I'll take the fireside cookie. It looks like a s'more, she pointed to them after I slid the door of the display counter open and took out the sweet treat that she'd asked for, slipping them into the bag. And you can follow me down here, I told her and walked down back to the counter where I met her at the register. What has this town come to? Aunt Maxie walked around the counter. She didn't officially work for me, but she did own the building and a few others located here on the boardwalk, and she had graciously offered to help me when Birdie had her class here. It was a big help too. Well, most of the time when she wasn't using the time here for her social hour. She had no problem giving her friends free food and drink while sitting for an hour and taking in all the news and goings around Honey Springs. There was a drive-by purse snatching. She turned her head slightly to the right in the direction of the mayor. I had no idea what's going to come of this town if we don't stop this crime. Her voice grew audibly louder and louder with each word. Purse snatching? I asked, making sure I'd heard her correctly. Purse snatching? Hope had come back through the door. Yes, and a moped. Aunt Maxie had finally gotten the attention of the mayor. He cleared his throat and stood up. There was some duct tape holding the darn thing together, too. I saw it with my own eyes. Aunt Maxie's words were running together. For a second, I thought he was going to come back to the counter and address Aunt Maxie, but the bell over the door dinged again, and it was Sheriff Spencer Shepherd. His jaw was hard and his green eyes had a serious look in them. His thick neck gave way to his deep chest beneath his brown uniform, where he proudly wore the 5-point sheriff's badge on the front pocket. When he took off his sheriff hat, like most men did when they entered an eating establishment, the waves of his sandy blonde hair lay flat against his head. He scanned the coffee house and stalked over to the mayor. Do you think I need to take the kids out? Hope asked, as we all noticed the seriousness of the situation taking place between the sheriff and the mayor, both elected officials of the good citizens of Honey Springs. No, I think it's all safe in here. I tried not to alarm her since I did know a few things about the law. By education, I was a lawyer. I'd left my law firm I'd share with my ex-husband and moved to Honey Springs, where I had fond memories of my time spent here with Aunt Maxie. Wasn't that the case? When we were hurt, didn't we desperately seek times in our lives when we recalled we were the happiest? That, for me, was Honey Springs, and the long summer days and nights I'd spent on this very boardwalk as a teenager. Back then, there were just a few shops, including the Crooked Cat, the local bookstore that was still here. Long story short, Aunt Maxie had this building unoccupied for a recent tenant, and it was easy to dream up my own coffee shop. She insisted on it, really, and I was so glad that she did. Years later, I was married to Patrick Kane, the boy I'd chased all over Honey Springs in those teenage years, and we had 2 fur babies. Sassy was a black standard poodle who belonged to Patrick, and Pepper, a salt and pepper schnauzer, had adopted me when I went to Pet Palace's Honey Springs local SPAC. Stop gawking and close your mouth. I leaned around Aunt Maxie and stuck my hand in front of her face. She was staring right at the mayor and Spencer as the two of them had a very heated conversation. If you don't get the budget passed, you won't have this cushy job. Spencer's word had a bite to them, and that didn't sit too well with the mayor. If you don't get these crimes under control, I'll see to it that my main platform this year will be to find our city a real sheriff who can keep the citizens of Honey Springs safe. The mayor was all too aware that the locals had been a little concerned with some of the crime they'd found its way into Honey Spring, leaving us with the task of making sure we kept our doors locked, something locals had rarely done in this part of Kentucky. Honey Springs was a little lake tourist town that only had was secluded from big cities and surrounded by beautiful hills and Kentucky bluegrass, but located on Lake Honey Springs, where fishing, boat, and lazy days spent in rental cabins was just a part of our daily life. Help! Help! Loretta Beebe busted through the coffee house door with a flutter, almost coming out of her jeweled strappy sandals. Hey! She screamed in her very southern accent. Her head twirled around and she snapped her eyes at Sheriff Spencer. I've been robbed right out in the parking lot in daylight. She pointed directly at Spencer with her perfectly polished and manicured finger. You, she gasped. The sparkle of the afternoon sun had filtered through the windows of the coffee house and landed directly on her shiny diamond ring. Get out there and do your job. Find my purse or else. Chapter 1, Barista Bump Off.